Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Akerson. I am a brand ambassador for PolarPro, Timelapse Plus, and MIOPS. Today I'm here to teach you my LRTimelapse workflow on my BenQ 321 or SW321C display. I also have in my background here the SW2700 PT, which is also a great display. I would love to thank BenQ for sponsoring this, and also PolarPro and LRTimelapse for providing some cool prizes at the end of this. I will have a Q&A session after the end credits. For those who want to stick around and pick my brain, you're more than welcome. First of all, I want to start off with the fact that if you have a professional level DSLR or mirrorless camera, not having a display that can display its full range of colors is kind of having a Ferrari with a Honda engine. Not being able to see your image's full capabilities is just hard for me to fathom. Ever since I upgraded my system with the SW2700 PT, I could actually see it. The 321 provides the 4K, while the 2700 has the 2K capabilities. I'd like to thank everybody else involved, including exclusively yours embroidery and Sand Section Music, who are providing our music today. They have a new live album out, which is really awesome. Good band, check them out. They're on iTunes and all the streaming services. So with that, let's get to the meat of the story here. So LRTimelapse is a program that will help you level and ramp your time-lapse sequences. I'll go more into how I capture them later when things are processing, but here's the main thing. I use a Timelapse Plus view for my time-lapse captures. One second, I apologize, technical difficulties. There we go. I use a Timelapse Plus view for my time-lapse captures. It provides XMPs that will help with the smoothing effects. You can also do it without it, and it'll still do all the ramping properly. It's just how you import it is the big difference. So here's an example with the XMPs. One second while it loads. And you'll see these lines here, up in here, as it loads real quick. You see this saw type shape line here of the exposure, and you're going to see that, you know, as the time lapse goes on, it looks flickery here because it's changing exposures, it's ramping the ISO, all that kind of stuff. And this is all unedited. These are 45 megapixel images. It's all not 16 by 9. It's, you know, the full images as of right now. This is the time lapse that we'll be working on today. I don't even know how to pronounce it. The Cross. It's up in near Newport News, Virginia, in the swamps. So this is all raw. So obviously there's a lot of editing to do. So that's with the XMPs. Now here it is. I'm sorry. Oh wait. You'll see with the XMPs, you'll see that right here, if you can see my cursor, it shows that it's already had the holy grail, which is the day to night, night to day transition, smoothing involved. And then you'd later go on into the visual deflicker to kind of get rid of all of this, all that flicker that I initially mentioned. Now we're going to be going off of the straight out of the camera version, so you'll be able to see a little bit more. I ran into a few little problems, but not ones that I couldn't solve, and ones that I can help show you how to overcome. So it's going to load here, and keep in mind I'm streaming here, so 45 megapixel images from my Z7 and my D850 plus streaming. It kind of eats on the processor and the GPU. I'm running a Ryzen 9 3900X, an EVGA GeForce RTX 2070 Extra or Ultra XC 2070 with 8 gigs of DDR VRAM, and I have 64 gigs of RAM. So even with that kind of level of image or that kind of power, it can still eat it up. So you're seeing here, you're getting a little bit more of the sawtooth here. So that'll come into play in a second. So I don't work on Gunther's exact workflow technique. When I get back from a shoot, I like to automatically just get into it and import all my stuff into Lightroom. So instead of going through the keyframe wizards, Holy Grail wizard, save, and then drag to Lightroom and then let it import, it kind of puts too much of a pause in it. I'd rather import everything and just read the XMPs that LRTimelapse produces. That's just me. You can do it however you want, but I find this to be a little bit more climactic than anticlimactic than waiting for all the in this case 985 images to import into Lightroom. So what we're going to do here is do the keyframe wizard. Now the keyframe wizard will produce a number depending on keyframes depending on all of your settings here. And once you kind of get used to it, you can adjust things as you see fit. So I'm just going to run with 5. And I'm also going to run the Holy Grail wizard here. Now the Holy Grail wizard is naturally would show right about here, since I've already imported this unfortunately. But I want to bring this level, so I'm going to rotate it in the Holy Grail wizard to where that end line is near the end of the yellow line. And then I'm going to hit save. So it's going to save all these XMPs, and we're going to go into Lightroom here. One second. And we're going to select all, and then we will go to metadata and read from files. Of course, yes, you do want to read those. So this will take a minute. Of course, gotta love Lightroom. Resource hog, but great program nonetheless. Now what's going to happen is the LRTimelapse is going to create the keyframes based on star ratings. So once this loads, I can go down to the filters and then click on the keyframes. It'll take a minute here, load them all. And once we do that, we edit the keyframes and we will bring it back into LRTimelapse, reread and reset and go from there. So we'll go in and edit the first image here. And actually, we'll do a select all and then develop. I like to use a basic import preset. It's just a personal preference, and then I base everything off that. So then I will deselect all. Now the wonderful thing about the D850 and the Z7 is that this was pitch black, even though you can clearly see that the sun is already rising. I couldn't see a thing, but these cameras are so great and they produce really great images. So we're going to go in here and edit the first keyframe. So basically my preset here will enable the corrections, do some sharpening, noise reduction, all that. One thing you really want to be careful with LRTimelapse, and it's a known thing if you're a user of LRTimelapse, is you don't want to go crazy with the dehaze between keyframes. You want to gradually bring it up or keep it static. That, in this case, it'll pretty much remain static throughout. So we'll go into the actual edit itself here of the first keyframe. First of all, you want to adjust your highlights here, adjust your blacks, adjust your whites. Adjust your shadow a little bit, adjust the highlights once more, bring it down a little bit. Excuse me, because this is a Holy Grail style time lapse, you want to start it off with a lower exposure, just ever so slightly, you know, to give that full effect. And like I said before, the initial images are already well exposed. Well, it shows more color, more light than what my eyes could visually see. I'm going to drop it by a quarter of a stop. Bring the saturation down just a tad, and like I said, the presets here will come in and give some contrast and all the rest of the basic settings here. Now I'm going to adjust the white balance a bit. I'm actually going to bring these highlights down because this cross itself up in Hampton Roads is lit at night with what seems to be Christmas lights, but they turn off during the day. So I'm going to take a white balance setting somewhere off of there. Actually bring this down to 55-ish, somewhere in there. So then I'm going to go to my next. We got the basic import again. Now you can see in this frame, like, the lights are actually off. So we're going to bring the highlights down so you can actually get some more cloud detail there. We're going to bring the shadows up. Let's see where we are on the whites. Without losing too much cloud detail. Bring some blacks back in, and you don't want to artificially raise everything here. Now another thing you can do is also put in gradient filters, but if you're going to do gradient filters, I would definitely do them from the start, even if there's no modifications. That way the LRTimelapse sees that gradient and will adjust from there forward. So original, this was a fire of a sunrise. It was just absolutely amazing. I'm going to drop the saturation down just a tad there. Dehaze, clarity, all look good. I don't like going over 3 with any of my images. I don't know why. I love the texture slider in Adobe Lightroom, but more for under than over. Anything over 3 and it just doesn't look right. So we're gonna play with the blacks a little here and bring them up just a tad. You don't want to look at make it look too artificial because it's still early in the sunrise. You want that natural shadow. So as the sun starts to rise here, I'm actually going to hit previous here. That way we have a, wait 1 second. I'm going to bring my white balance off of right here, and I have no gradients, and I did not use a graduated neutral density on this. That's way too much. So we're gonna drop this down to like 5,000 or 5,500 and bring this up to about 3. And that's really what it looked like. And yes, I know it's not completely level. I'll fix that here in a minute. So I'm going to go to previous here. That way we start with kind of the same settings here. Now, the highlights are definitely going to be different here since the sun is rising and in the frame. Bring the whites up a little bit. Bring the shadows up a little bit. Got a little bit more detail here. Bring the blacks down a little bit for some contrast. I try and avoid using the exposure slider except for in the first one, as I believe that causes a lot more issue than anything. I'm sorry here. Let me go up to now you can actually see my edits here. So we're over here, and there's our original. Oh, less saturation. You see the histogram is looking pretty good here. Here's the Adobe landscape. In this case, actually, let's see. I don't know if I did. I did. Okay. So we'll go with the Adobe landscape. So that's looking pretty good. Maybe bring the shadows up a little bit so you get a little bit more detail. What I really like is this beached sailboat over here. Didn't even see that till after the sun rose. Again, we'll go to the next image, previous, edit, and then work on it from there. So we're going to go back. In this case, when you're dealing with sunrises, you want to, or sunsets, you want to deal with the whites. Probably bring down the shadows just a little bit for some contrast. Same with the blacks. And the whites up there, because you want that nice bright sun right behind the cross. I thought it was rather neat looking. By the way, I use photo pills for seeing where the sun is going to rise or set, or meteor showers, or the Milky Way and that kind of thing. It's a really great app. It's worth every penny. And then we're going to go to our final keyframe. Once again, previous. Now, in this one, and I'm not so much sure about this one, but there's a little bit of a green cast that I found in this one. And that's just color balance altogether. But one way I can really see, and I haven't a clue why, but is when I go back to the grid view, I can actually see the green right here as opposed to not seeing it in here or any of these other ones. I find that jumping from the full screen to the to the develop to the grid view to be beneficial to freshen my eyes to the image, especially in a image that I don't use motion gear for. So what I'm going to do here actually is just use my preset that I have for this one, which lowered the white balance and up the tint some. So what you got here is you got your pre-sunrise and your post-sunrise. So you're going to select all of them. You're going to save your metadata. So save to files and hit continue. Sure, I can. I apologize. Is that better? A little bit better on the volume there? So I'm going to take this back into LRTimelapse. And I'm going to hit reload. Thank you. Appreciate the feedback. So I've hit reload. It's brought in the blue diamonds, which are all your keyframes. And with LRTimelapse, you can use this icon right here if there's too many things that are, or if there are certain elements that stay the same throughout the time-lapse sequence. You can hit this and it'll lower or it'll reduce the amount of fields that you have. Like, for instance, all these fields of all these different adjustments, and which would even add more if you were to say introduce gradients and that kind of thing. Now it reduces it to just a few, and you're going to hit auto transition. What this is going to do is going to take your settings from your keyframes and try and adjust them the best that it can, which it does a really good job at, to give you the time lapse you're looking for, especially in a Holy Grail. So it's done that already, and then we're going to jump into the visual previews. Now this is going to take a minute usually. It'll take a little bit longer, even more with the fact that I'm streaming right now. So it's going to save all this, all the auto transitions, and develop the previews. So there's a couple of key tools I use. One of them are PolarPro filters. These are great filters. I love how they come in a solid case here. I'll be giving one of these away out later today at the end of the webinar, an ND64 with polarizer. This happens to be the ND1000 polarizer, which is, this will stop some serious light. The ND64 will also do so. You want to have a good ND filter on there if you can't carry something like the Summit system, which I'm about to show you, due to size or weight constraints. The PolarPro Summit filter system is really awesome. Take this out without. This is a 3-stage system which has, one second here. It's a 3-stage system with a graduated neutral density filter, and notice how it doesn't fall through the bottom, and then you can lock it in. It has a solid neutral density filter, which is awesome because if you have the filter setup attached to your filter ring at a fairly level or near level situation, like you would in a situation like this, as the sun rises, you can just slide this in carefully, and if it's level, you really don't have to worry about locking it in. I would pay attention to that when you're taking it off of your camera and whatnot, but you can slide it in, and once it's in, because of the fact you don't have to lock it down, it's one less movement on your camera as you're capturing your time lapse, and one less frame or two that you might have to delete in the time-lapse process. In conjunction with that, it also has a circular polarizer in the back, which you can also remove if you don't want to be using it, but I find it very beneficial. The only drawback to this specific system is the fact that on my 14 to 30, it's only good at about 17 millimeters on, which is fairly good all things considered. I mean, it's a great system and I love it and I use it religiously. I also use my PolarPro Peter McKinnon edition 2 to 5 stop filter to give that extra blur in the time-lapse sequence that it needs. One of the other biggest tools that I have is the Timelapse VIEW. It is great. It auto ramps the interval. It auto ramps your exposure. It can also auto ramp aperture and everything else. Check out Professional Photographers of America, Professional Photographer magazine for the July 2020 issue on page 46. For my write-up on the PolarPro and the setup there. For my motion, I use the MIOPS Capsule 360 system, which is really awesome. Timelapse Plus and MIOPS got together to make it to where it was Bluetooth integrated, so it's, you know, one less wire to worry about, one less wire to be blowing in the wind during long exposures and the such. So we're almost done there. I'm watching you can watch that pink line right there. You can watch this pink line right here, and it's building the visual previews. In just a second here, when it finishes, I can show you how it finally edits all of this out. Almost there. And we're at a bingo. So I'll be able to hit play here and you can watch as it goes. Oh, I forgot to crop it. My bad there. But this is the full view of how it has combined all those settings that I put in the keyframes together to produce a time lapse. Now after you watch this, you're going to want to do some tinkering and obviously crop it to the 16:9 for the standard video output. But the next step would be to do the visual deflicker. The visual deflicker is going to get rid of those kind of up and down, kind of where the camera was adjusting exposure or ISO or anything else, all the ramping. So you go into visual deflicker here, and I prefer doing 2 passes with the accuracy of more, somewhere between 15 and 30. Now at the 15 to 30, or from the 20 to 30 mark at dual passes, it's going to take some time even if you have a beast machine. In this instance, I believe I was right around 18, and then you hit apply. So you can see how it's going to take the pink line here and adjust it to this green line as best as possible to kind of even out all these little bumps along the way. This part's fun and takes a while. It's one of the points where I kind of just sit back and maybe go get a snack or a drink or enjoy stuff. again, I want to thank BenQ for sponsoring this, and LRTimelapse for providing a LRTimelapse Pro license for everybody this afternoon, or for one person this afternoon, and PolarPro for providing a ND64/polarizer for a lucky winner this afternoon. I'm trying to keep up here with your comments. I apologize. The 3 lines. Okay, so the line here is your exposure or ramping. This is the initial kind of what it thought it would be. Again, some more exposure here, and then the yellow is the timeline. As you can see, with the diamonds have your keyframes. And which camera would you like me to move? Or am I good now, Mrs. Donna? Again, this part takes a little while, especially when you do a 2-pass run. It just really makes sure that everything is dialed in, which I really like. You can even further refine it if you'd like. Takes a little bit of time though. If you'd like to learn more about the really in-depth time-lapse capture, you're talking with manual bulb ramping with a remote, everything in camera, all that kind of stuff. Emeric's time-lapse is really awesome. He has a full video package that's really beneficial. Even I believe there's even some marketing and how to push your work, which is really cool too. This is just a primer on LRTimelapse, and I don't assume to know everything about this piece of software. It's very powerful. I'm just hoping to parlay some of this over to you guys so you can see how this works and how to really take advantage of it. I have all the links below to LRTimelapse, to PolarPro, to Timelapse Plus, to MIOPS. I forgot to bring that out. These little bad boys right here, the MIOPS Capsule 360s, and there's an L bracket, which is really neat. You can do multi-axis motion control, which is really helpful. Even the bracket itself alone is extremely helpful when using just a single axis. Hi, Mike. My settings on the camera are in manual. I let the Timelapse Plus take complete control of that. You set your initial exposure rating and ISO and give it a few guidelines to go against, and it will develop, or it will shoot for that. So we're almost done with the first deflickering run, and the second one usually goes a little bit slower, but it's more fine-tuned. Now you can see that this pink line is more in line with the green line that we set it to do through that visual deflicker, which is the 0 through 60 rating there. Like I said, the higher the number that you set for that green line for the evening, the longer it's going to take. And of course I'm going to be made a liar, and the second round went far quicker than the first. So it's almost done here. Now, Mike, keep in mind you can also do many more things. You can do aperture priority with interval with your camera internally if it has that function. There's apps, but the most accurate thing I've had, the most accurate device that I've had to really ramp and determine the best intervals and exposures has been the Timelapse VIEW in combination with the LRTimelapse. The nice thing about it is, like, and I think you'll see it in this time lapse, is you can see there's a car coming around. It's, I don't know, about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning in a little fishing town up in Newport News, or near Newport News. And it's not going to take those headlights and instantly massively erroneously expose those images based on that. It's going to take a few images of a consistent light change before the Timelapse Plus will actually ramp up or down, which is really nice because you're not losing a lot of frames. So here we are in the output here, and I'm going to hit play here so you guys can see what that leveling did. So now you're not seeing any flicker aside for the lights on the cross, and it's still not level, but that was because I didn't crop it. My mistake. You got that beautiful sunrise just coming up. So that was that. I'm going to show you what my final imagery looked like, because if I were to sit here and export 985 images, we would be here for about an hour and a half, if not longer, and I don't think anybody wants to do that. So what I'm going to do is go into each image and put the presets from my final edit, which I'll show you here in a minute. And then, so which really weren't that far off. Oops. One of the real key things here, especially with the BenQ monitors, is the hardware calibration. You get the white balance, you get the full Adobe RGB spectrum, which is really nice. You don't get any banding where sRGB would, or even some of the other displays, short of one of the higher end Retina displays, would give you. You get to see everything, and 99% of everything, and that's really great because you can really see what your camera's capable of, and that's what excites me about BenQ monitors. So we're gonna go here. So we're gonna reload real quick into LRTimelapse. So what I'm gonna do here is, one sec. I'm gonna save all my keyframes, overwrite the settings, jump back over here, and I'm going to go to File, actually Reload, and we're going to reload, or I'm sorry, no, we don't want to do that. So we're going to delete all the visual previews here, and I'm going to bring you into what my final edits were. Because I mean, every time you edit something, It can be different depending on how you are. So it's going to delete all the previews real quick here. Does anybody else have any questions that you'd like to bring up here while we wait? So we're reloading the X and P data. So I'm just going to save again, reload. Don't want to save, and we're reloading X and P data. And then we're going to come in here, and since all of them are selected, we'll go off the brightest image here, because when you try and level an image that's really dark, it's hard to find that horizon line. Go in here to the angle. We're going to go from about there to right about there. Nope. There we go. And then I don't like the Lightroom setting here, because then it sets it to standard 1080. That's the beautiful thing about LRTimelapse, especially the Pro version, is you can render up to 8K. So I just do a standard 16:9. And I want to get some of that foreground in there. I'm going to play with it a little bit. This one, obviously, you can see how sharp the bird is. I didn't toss in the PolarPro neutral density. I was using my 2 to 5 stop at that point. You want to leave enough room here for some cloud action, because in nature, that's where all the action really is. Aside from the wildlife is the clouds and the sun and all that. So these are all set. We're going to reload again. Actually, save, reload. Auto transition. How long did it take me to get really familiar with the software? That's a really good question. I'm still not completely there yet. I'd like to say that I am, but I'm still learning new things every day, especially when it came to flexing the Holy Grail rotation there. And you asked, Mr. Turner, you asked about the lines before. If you click up here, you can actually see what it's showing and what you can choose to show. I'm just showing based off exposure. Now you can go off white balance, temperature, intervals, shadows, highlights, etc. It's as I mentioned, it's the gold standard of all time-lapse software. Timelapse Plus has a really good Lightroom plugin, but this takes you from, aside from the keyframe editing and the export process, from raw files to something that can be rendered, such as a TIFF or a JPEG, and it also renders it once it's done. You don't need Premiere Pro, you don't need Resolve or anything else. You need Lightroom or Bridge, and you need LRTimelapse. So right now we're going to do a auto transition here based on the settings I had before. I don't know why that spike is happening. One moment. I'm going to turn the visual previews off. Do the auto transition. It's a tricky piece of software, and it's very useful, but at the same time can be very frustrating if you do things in the wrong order. And that's why I only do the import process in the quote-unquote wrong order, because I can just read the XMPs later once everything's imported. So I've done the auto transition, and now it's doing the visual previews again with the new settings. And you can get your preview here and up until this green line. As the green line goes, it'll stop once it hits a yellow, which is what's still processing. Again, I'll be around after this for Q&A if anybody wants some one-on-one time, or however many on one time, and we can answer all the questions. I hope that some of you have downloaded some of the software here and are working with me in unison. Again, sometimes parts of this take a little while, especially on such a long time lapse. Your average time lapse is roughly 10 to 20 seconds. This one's in the 42 range, which is a little much, but I wanted to get the whole shebang-a-bang. And just for the record, you guys are going to actually see the final product of this here shortly. Sometimes it has some odd spikes, which are interesting to see. It's not reading a certain element correctly. But the visual deflicker will take care of that. I believe, yes, 5.4.3 is the most recent version. So we'll go into the visual deflicker again. We'll ramp it back up to about 18-ish. Multiple passes. I like the accuracy being more. And I'm actually going to reset it and then start again and apply it. One second. I'm going to reload here. Doesn't seem to really read the XMPs correctly. We'll do the auto transition again. Now the visual previews are actually clicked off. Save visual previews again. There we go. That looks more accurate. There we go. City scenes are really fun, especially if you have an ND filter, if you're, or particularly at night where you can get the streaks of light from aircraft and vehicles combined. It's really neat. Yes, I do use manual focus 100%. I try during the day. If I'm shooting a daytime time lapse, I will shoot at the sweet spot of the lens, which is usually the middle, somewhere between an f8 and f11, which is almost every lens's sweet spot. If I'm shooting a holy grail like this, I will generally stick to a wide aperture, somewhere like with this lens in particular, f2.8. With my Z7 and my 14 to 30 millimeters, the maximum aperture is f4. I want to reduce noise, but you put up a little bit of softness and vignetting. It's one of those things that can be corrected in post, to be honest, as much as I like to get it correctly in the camera. It's one of those give and take things. If you're shooting a nighttime or a day to night, night to day holy grail, if you're shooting a 45 megapixel camera, as I do, over 13 seconds you're going to get star trails, which isn't always a bad thing, but at the same time I'd rather avoid them at all costs. And I set my manual focus to where it's just shy of what the camera has the hard stop of infinity. I like to focus on a star, for example, and get it as narrow and tack as I can, and I do that by using live view and go in and fine-tune the zoom, and then I zoom back out. Now that doesn't even matter if I have something that's 10 feet in front of me. I focus on that star, and that's what sets my zoom, or I'm sorry, my focus. And then obviously switch the lens over to manual. So we're going to come back in here and do the visual previews. This 321C monitor is just killer. The range of color it displays and the size, the sheer size. There's a reason they call it the Emperor, and the reason it won the TIPA 2020 Photo Editing Monitor of the Year. It is just a beast. You gotta have some serious desk space, that's for sure, but it is worth every penny. If you look down in the information, there's a 5% off discount code, which is rare with BenQ because they rarely run sales because they're constantly sold out as it is. So to get any discount on a BenQ monitor is an awesome perk. Please use that. It covers a wide variety of the photo monitors and video editing monitors. Take advantage of that while you can. If you're on the edge of wanting to get a display that displays full or 99% Adobe RGB, there's just nothing like it. Jumping from one to another, from a standard display to one that can display such a range of colors is phenomenal. So we're going to go back into visual deflicker here, because obviously there's a couple issues here. So we'll run this at, again, 18. We'll hit the more and multi-pass deflicker and hit apply, and we're going to run with that. Hi, Paul. Yeah, let me photographing Neo-wise right now would be really cool, especially with a MIOPS Capsule 360, because you can do star tracking with it. Instead of having to buy a dedicated star tracker, you have a video device, a time-lapse device, and so much more. It can be difficult to align for polar alignment, but it's still really good. Once you get it really dialed in, you could get NEO-eyes really well, and they can handle pretty hefty lenses. I can handle my 200 to 500 on it, especially if I'm shooting with my Z7. And then these techniques with this plus stacking, there's a Nikon ambassador name, and I'm probably gonna slaughter her name, and if you're watching, I apologize, but Deb Sandage, and she has a wonderful how-to on how to actually stack images for that kind of thing. I mean, you can use stacking in general with time lapse, but she has a really good one on stacking for clouds and for stuff like that. Sorry. Right. I don't ever trust the infinity mark, ever, really. That's why I dial into a star and get it as tack as I can, because I know based on depth of field and the lens and the focal length, which again photopills comes into play here, I can determine what the closest I can be to any subject in my frame based on my aperture, etc., and get everything in focus. Sorry, I have to move over here because my camera is in my way of the actual. There we go. And yes, when I'm manually focusing, yeah, I tend to do just what I just said with the. I apologize. Again, I focus manually to a star or to something that's very distant and get it tack sharp if it's during the day, like a tree or a power pole or something very far and distant, and then I turn off autofocus, and I generally carry some gaffer tape or scotch tape, and I tape the focus ring in place. Fairly common in astrophotography. I would love to see if somebody could actually get a time lapse. I've seen a couple of them, but a really good time lapse of NEO-eyes from a long-term time lapse. I've been thinking about it, but the rain has been too horrible here, and cloud covers really killed any idea of getting a sunset to sunrise long-term NEO-eyes / astro time lapse. So the first run on this one is nearly finished, and now with time lapse, there's always the occasion where you're going to bump your tripod, or maybe wind affects your tripod stability, in which you can easily go in and find that frame, click on it, right click, and you can remove the image or you can delete it altogether. I'm sorry, let me put that back up on the screen. So you can actually remove the image, which will put it into a separate folder, like an excluded folder, or you can delete the image altogether. It's up to you. So it's running its second deflicker around here, and then I will switch over down here so you can see this. So in our sample here, here's what the 16:9 actually works out to look like. This is just a preview. You can take this into Premiere or any other software that accepts LUTs and apply different LUTs to it on top of the editing that you do. I find that kind of useful in Premiere Pro. The straight LDR, NDR, and HDR can play some cool tricks on it in post, or post-post, I guess that would be. So after this is done, basically what you would do, now that all the functionality here is done, and I see we're running low on time here, is you would come into your full sequence in your Lightroom catalog. You'd select all, go to metadata, read metadata from files, and you'll hit read. This is the part where I save you guys some time and frustration, and like I said, after this part, when you go to export it, even with a beast machine, Lightroom takes quite a bit of time, especially for, in this instance, I think it's 985 images. Yeah, 985 images, which is at 24 frames per second, which is your standard, or 23.975, is about 43 seconds in there. So what it's doing here is just reading all this XMP data. So, as it says right there. So with LRTimelapse being a plug-in / standalone program for Lightroom, you would go to export. Even if it's not all done, it'll figure it out by the time you're done here. Now, certain functions here require the Pro version, such as the TIFF output and the 16-bit output. But you can output to 4K, UHD, 4K, 6K, 8K, or the original if you didn't want to crop to 16:9 and have the bars on the side as YouTube or Facebook or any other social medias would really put on there. The only thing this really doesn't have is, and is completely understandable, is an output for Instagram, which has the odd portrait orientation, and I can't say that I blame them for not including that. I have the Pro version, so I always do the TIFF and the 16-bit LRT Pro and go to 4K UHD. But what's really nice is that as long as your camera can support it, the dimensions, you got 8K options here, 6K options here. This is going to future-proof your work, because once you export all these, you still can keep this in a library and delete these intermediary files that this is going to create. So this part takes a minute, so I'm going to do the fast forward version and show you the hour and 21 minutes I believe this 985 took me. It's quite a while, especially while recording it. So here you go. Hour and 21 minutes. If you look down at the bottom right, I believe is what it takes. I didn't know that about the Sony lenses, Mike. I don't use Sony. Haven't used them very much. I'm not really familiar with those. I use Nikon exclusively. When it comes to the sunburning and the sensor, the ramping will have it to the point where you're not doing long exposures into the sun. You're doing very fast exposures at a very I apologize there. You're doing very fast exposures. It's not like you're doing long exposures in the sun to where it's going to really matter. I've never ran into an issue in any of my time lapses with the sun being an issue other than sun flares, and that's just from the lens and itself. So you saw that hour and 21 minutes of exporting in about 40 something seconds, and I wanted to show you the final product that I created. I hope you dig it. This was just one of the most amazing sunrises under the worst conditions. The bugs were nasty, and they seemed to not even care about bug spray, and I managed to smash my iPhone even in an OtterBox that morning, which was absolutely wonderful. Got a new iPhone 11 though. I guess some things do work out. So again, I want to thank BenQ for sponsoring this and for providing me the SW321C monitor. I also want to thank LRTimelapse for providing a pro license to one of the lucky winners today, and also PolarPro for providing an ND64/PL polarizer filter, which there's something to be said about PolarPro filters. There's no color casts, and the optical clarity is unreal. It's made out of quartz. They're just great lenses. If any of you would like to stick around after I run the closing credits, please do. I'll answer any other questions. Check out the links below. And I really hope that I imparted some good knowledge for you, and that you get something out of this. Let's select some winners here. All right, for the LRTimelapse, it is saying that Brian F.O. has won the LRTimelapse Pro license. If you could email me, I'll provide a link, or I'll provide that here in a minute. Let's see. And Laughing Spiders run the PolarPro filter. Congratulations, y'all. Congratulations. Again, I really appreciate you all watching this. I really appreciate all the sponsors and Sand Section Music and Exclusively Yours Embroidery. And I will be doing another webinar next month with BenQ for waterfall photography editing if you'd like to join in, and I'd appreciate that too. I'm going to put my, oh, that's interesting. Okay. For the winners, Brian F.O. or Brian F.O., I'm sorry, and where'd it go? The spider. Laughing Spider. Go ahead and I'll put my email afterward, and contact me please so I can get your shipping information. Thank you again, and again, if you want to stick around after the closing credits roll to ask some questions, feel free. Thank you.
Teenage wasteland for the weak, got on their arms. They come back believing, yeah. Seen it with my own eyes, touched it firsthand, 'cause my best friend is falling away from me. my words can't get through to you, well, surely my tears do. Let them come and wash this away, you will. What you say society has placed upon you, well, I'd say so too, my friend. That's why I don't blame you. Dark rings around your eyes, they make your actions fit your age. But you'll never really get there, never really get there. One shame. When dawn breaks, do you wish you had a place to call your home? Yeah, the night's not quite so lonely. If my words can't get through to you, well, surely my tears do. Let them come and wash this away, you will. Wish you said society has blessed upon you, well, I'd say so too, my friend. That's why I don't blame you. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Anybody still there? If you are, I'd love to answer your questions. Gotta love the latency. For those of you who do have any questions further, my email address is down in this, the info@akersonstudios.com. I'm sorry. Timelapse Plus, it's not an app, it's actually a device. 1 second. This is a Timelapse Plus. It actually attaches to your hot shoe and your trigger, and it works to it goes through your USB and will trigger your camera. It reads your settings, and it reads the exposure, the luminosity versus actual total exposure, and maintains that luminosity instead of like I mentioned before, with like car lights and stuff, like randomly messing up a time lapse or a frame. It has an app, so you can operate it remotely, which is kind of cool. In this case, I don't know if I have any of my priors saved on it, but what's really cool is you can actually just give it a wave, these hand gestures, without having to touch it or use a mobile app, and actually see the time lapse as it's being shot, like up to that point, which is really cool. The mobile app provides a little bit more functionality. It provides for keyframing, especially if you have motion gear. In one way or another, it's compatible with just about every piece of gear on the market, from the MIOPS to Emodimo, dynamic perception, SERP, all that. But the full multi-axis integration for me is the MIOPS Capsule 360 system. So you can see here, let's see, I don't know if it's going to show really well on here, but yeah, it's probably not. Yeah, because it's not hooked up. But yeah, you can do hand gestures. There's this little sensor right here. You can do hand gestures instead of having to, and you can disconnect from its built-in Wi-Fi access point while it's shooting, and it'll keep shooting. There's also apps for that, or apps for time-lapse shooting, but I find this to be the most accurate and most dependable. All right, looks like everybody's checked out here. Thank you again for watching, and Laughing Spider and Brian Foe, please get a hold of me so I can get you your prizes. Appreciate it. Thank you, BenQ. Thank you to LRTimelapse,